from North Dakota and Minnesota. I went to junior and senior high school in Minneapolis and started the university when I graduated. After 2 quarters at the university, I forgot to tell you, before, when I was in high school, I was studying at my desk on a Sunday afternoon, and on Sundays, the New York Philharmonic used to have a program, and it was good to study with because it was nice, quiet, classical music. The program was interrupted, and it was announced that Pearl Harbor had been attacked. The next day at school, the principal sent everyone to his or her homeroom, and we all heard President Roosevelt declare war on Japan. Then, as I said, after graduation, I went to the university for 2 quarters, and I began to feel guilty about not doing something for the war effort. They needed nurses, and so the government had instituted this cadet nurse corps, where you would join and they would pay your tuition and so on. A friend of mine from high school and I joined, and about the time that I was ready to move into the hospital, I realized that I had made a mistake. I'm not a nurse. I'm not nurse material. So I asked my father if I could borrow the money to pay back the government for the time that I had been in. It was something like $250 or $230, something like that. And I should tell you, he was the personnel director for a large corporation in the Midwest. And his answer was, no, that you can't be a quitter. You signed up for that. This is what you should do. I borrowed the money from someone else and moved out of the hospital, and I finished the courses that we were taking for nursing they were being offered at the University of Minnesota. So I wanted the units and continued with the courses. They were wonderful. It was the nursing part I didn't like. At the end of the 3rd quarter that year, my friend, another friend that I had met at the university, and I decided that we would like to do some war work, not nursing. So we got on the Greyhound bus and went to Seattle and found a place in a private home. There were no apartments available, but we did have a room in a private home. The home had a bus stop outside of it. We didn't have a car, and we moved in, and I don't think we didn't have kitchen privileges, so we had to get our meals kind of fly by. The reason that we know that's the home is that when my friend and I were together paying bills, and as we would be eating out and so on, it became kind of cumbersome to have to each pony up the money. And so what we did was we made what we called the kitty, and this is the actual wallet that we used. It was at the beginning of the month or whenever we got paid, we would put money in, each of us, and then we'd pay for our expenses out of that. It was very handy, and we were not ever fighting about money. It would solve the problem. And because of this, Tammy was able to find a picture of the house. We called it the kitty. Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Yeah.
She usually hands me back.
Yeah, I forgot to give it to her. I still have it.
Oh. Look how tiny it is. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Oh.
It saved the friendship, I would recommend that sort of thing when people have to live together. we asked our landlady, about, where to get a job. We wanted more work, and she said, well, there are two main industries in Seattle. One is rowing, and the other is the shipyard. The shipyard pays better. So that's what she told us. So we went down to, the office where the Todd Pacific Shipyard had its, hiring and so on in downtown Seattle. And before we could be signed on or hired, they would be glad to hire us. And part of the hiring would be joining the union, the International Brotherhood of Boilermakers, Welders, and Helpers. I told you my father was a personnel director for a large corporation, and so I had grown up on the other side of the union. It was interesting. Anyway, we were hired as welders. We were sent to school for 2 weeks and to learn to weld. The welding was not difficult. It's easy for women because the motions that one uses when one welds are similar to sewing. And so you tack in sewing to hold things together till you can stitch the seam. In welding, you run little tacks, little inch long welds along the seam after the ship fitter has positioned two pieces of metal together. The place that we worked was in the steel shed, which is where we did some of the beginnings of the destroyers. By the way, we were making destroyers at the shipyard. It was the Todd Pacific Shipyard. And the thing that I remember most about the going to school were the safety things that they told us. Now, you've already heard about the glass in the helmet. And in addition to that, the welding rod has a coating on it, and that coating, when it burns, makes a toxic smoke, and one shouldn't breathe it. So we had what the welders called suckers. They were actually vacuum hoses that you kept next to your weld as you went along, and you saved your lungs and didn't have problems later in life. After we had the 2 weeks of schooling, we went to the shipyard. We lived on the corner of this nice neighborhood in Seattle where we caught the bus, went down to Yesler Way, which is like the Embarcadero in San Francisco, and then we caught a ferry out to Harbor Island where the shipyard was. The clothing we wore was already talked about. In addition to that, the thing that we had that was different, everything was all leather, suede leather, and we had a little cap. It was kind of a pillbox of soft leather, and then they'd sewn a skirt around it, and it kind of went here, and so it covered the hair. My hair was long at that time, and I would braid it, and I wore bows on the pigtails, and it, kept it out of the way. When we got there, we would put our welding clothes on. We had these shipyard boots, and they were soles about an inch thick, and very heavy leather, and steel toes, and we worked 6 days a week, and sometimes we would be asked to work on Sundays, so we'd be 7 days. And when we were free, we would go put our lady clothes on and go out to dinner or something, and we would look at each other and break into laughter because we walked like Tennessee walking horses with the women's shoes on instead of these heavy shipyard boots lifting our legs up. Anyway, clothing was put on. They told us ahead of time that it was gonna be cold. We worked swing shift, going to work about 4 and finishing about between 11 and 12. And it was cold. San Francisco's cold, but Seattle's colder. And, they told us that we might want to put a pair of pajamas on under our clothes as another layer. And to tell you how right they were, our first paycheck went for 50% wool long john underwear. And we bought a second pair as soon as we could afford it, so we could change. It really was cold. The shipyard we worked in, the Todd Pacific shipyard, was smaller than the ones here. But we just made destroyers, and I worked in the steel shed where we began things. The pieces of metal were, about 5/8 of an inch to an inch thick, and they would be brought in, cut to shape already, and the ship fitters would clamp them together and ask for a welder who would tack it and then weld it. After you welded it, with the little hammer that we carried that had a point on it, we'd take the crust off that was the slag, and that was from the wrapping on the welding rod. We did things kind of from the beginning, and then when it was put together in a number of ways, the piece would be lifted out by the riggers who had little not carts, but little enclosures above that went on tracks, and then they would reach down and pick the things up. One of the riggers had taken a couple pieces of welding rod and twisted them together, put them on the track that his rig went on, and to shape it, and made a bracelet. He said, "Would you like it?"
Oh.
And so that's it. It's welding rod. It's not silver. It looks silver, but anyway, just a friendly gesture. Because we made the beginnings of the ship, we didn't have the satisfaction of someone who worked outside on the ship and could see what they'd done and how it fit in and everything. And it was one thing that was lacking is this feeling of completion. And so one Sunday when I was working out on the ship, my job was to weld in this hose pipe. A hose pipe is the tube that the anchor chain goes through from the deck to the anchor. And this had to be welded into the ship, and that was my job. It took me a whole shift to do it. You don't just go around it once. Because it's a right angle, you fill it in with welding, and it has to be cleaned off each time and so on. So my claim to fame is that one destroyer had its port side hose pipe that I welded. You gotta take what you get. We worked there for a number of months, and my friend had been offered a job up in Juneau by a friend of hers who was working for the Forest Service up there. And everyone has a bucket list, and hers was go to Alaska. She wanted to go. I said no for a long time, but eventually I gave in. We went, told our landlady that we were going to Alaska, and she said, "Do you have a place to live?" And no, we'll get a hotel room. Well, she said, "I'll call my husband." Fortunately, when we got up there by ship, we went up by the Princess Nora, which was a cruise ship, but it wasn't then. And when we got up there, fortunately, she'd called her husband and he'd gotten us a room. The legislature was in session. Juneau was the capital of the territory of Alaska. And we wouldn't have had a place to stay that night if she hadn't done that. The next morning, we got up and went down the main street of Juneau, in South Franklin Street or something like that. And we walked down and found a building that had 4 totem poles in front, real totem poles. Went in, and it was a very famous shop called the Nugget Shop. It was a place that sold not things from China, but Alaskan gold nuggets, gold jewelry made with Alaskan gold, walrus tusks with scrimshaw, and lovely baskets that the area Indians had made. While we were in there, we were talking to the woman behind the counter, and she realized that we hadn't, that we were new, actually, first day. And she said, "Do you have a place to live?" And we said, "No, that's the next thing we're going to look for." And she said, "Well, I just happen to have a furnished apartment upstairs." This was unheard of during the wartime. People waited months and even years to get a place to live. So we moved in there, went down, she got her job with the Forest Service. I went to the employment office, and I was hired by the Army Transportation Corps. Seattle is a port of embarkation, and Juneau is a sub-port of embarkation. And at that time, they were just beginning to need lumber in the South Pacific because the islands were being captured, and they needed lumber to build structures. And I was hired to duplicate the manifests and the hatch lists. And we were just starting it. I was there just for the first ship, and it took us from 8 one morning until 3 the next morning to complete the paperwork. The ships can't sail without these papers. And after that, it was easy, but we were all together. I worked in the office. There were 3 of us women, and the rest were servicemen. And but the servicemen all had dog tags. Well, I wanted a dog tag, so they made me one. I was not in the service. They've used my pass number to get onto the subport on the thing, but I could be one of them. And we were working together. At that time, everybody was on the same side. We were all trying to get the war over. The servicemen, and there were 3 of us women in the office. One was old enough to be my mother, and the other was about 10 years older than I. And we worked as a team. Everything was fine. We were there on VJ Day, and our apartment was on the main street, and we could look out of the window and see the celebration going on. When it was announced that the war was over, the enlisted men were cutting off the ties of the officers, and they were all celebrating right below us. There was no more reason after that to stay in Juneau because the war was over. We went back to Minnesota and to the university, went for a year, decided that we wanted to come to California, and we drove out here and came across the bridge, the Bay Bridge, on my friend's birthday, which is July 22nd, 1946. Got a room in a private home in San Francisco because apartments were not available, and worked in San Francisco, both of us, first with an insurance company. I quit because I found out that after I'd been promoted and everything, my file clerk was making $5 a month more than I was. So I quit. The next job, I quit because after working at it for a couple of years and finding it very nice, very successful and everything, where do I go from here? And I was told, you're young, you're going to get married and have babies and leave us. This is it, glass ceiling. So my friend and I went to Berkeley, moved across to Berkeley, and we finished our bachelor's, got our master's, and I got my PhD in educational psychology. I worked, we worked our way through. I worked up at Poultry Husbandry, and my friend worked for residence halls accounting. And as we worked, we taught ed psych to the younger, lower division students. It was an upper division course, and that helped pay our way too. I was involved with the AAAS, American Association for the Advancement of Science, for rewriting curriculum in science. Sputnik had happened, and our science education was shown to be very needy. And I worked with them for 4 summers, and I was part of the writing group for Science the Process Approach. When I was in my 40s, my friend and I both wanted to get a pilot's license. It was on our bucket list. And we went to school, night school at Albany High School for the ground school, and we went out to Napa Airport and did the flying. And we were able to join the 99s, the International Organization of Licensed Women Pilots that had been started by Amelia Earhart when there were only 99 women that were licensed pilots. I taught in Berkeley for 30 years, and I'm here now doing the same kind of things, teaching, telling the young people what it was like during the war, how we were responding to the need that the government had of people to work. And we also learned that equal pay for equal work, and in addition to that, when you are told that it's too hard work for a woman, don't believe it. I wanted to be a veterinarian, and the veterinary school in Iowa that was closest to us did not accept women for veterinary school because it was too hard work. And last of all, stand up for yourself. Don't let them push you around because you're a woman, or say you can't do things, because we can do it.
All right. So I'm going to tell you about another